If you want to learn how to use Xcode to build apps, you're in the right place. My name is Chris, and our team has taught thousands of students how to use Xcode, how to code, and how to publish apps. Now, I have to tell you though, this Xcode tutorial is going to be a little different than the others that you've seen. Instead of just giving you a walkthrough, I'm going to show you how to use Xcode in the context of building an app, so that by the end of this tutorial, you're going to have working knowledge that you can put to use right away. All right, enough talking, let's dive in. If you don't have Xcode installed, go ahead, open the Mac App Store, type in Xcode, and click this and install it. Now, I will say that it's a pretty big file size. You're going to need even more space than this just to get it installed. And the second thing is I would ignore these bad ratings. Xcode is the official software that Apple gives us to build iOS apps, and even iOS professionals who are developing apps day to day are using Xcode to do it. Also, I would mention that if you're just starting out, avoid the Xcode betas because they contain bugs and Apple's still changing things, and these things just add roadblocks to you if you're trying to learn how to build apps. So stick to the releases in the App Store. These are the official public releases. Okay, once Xcode is installed, go ahead, launch it, and let's start your new project. Alright, Xcode is launched, and you're going to see this welcome dialog. If you don't see this, don't fear. Just go to File, New, and choose Project. And what we're going to do here, you probably won't have these because these are recent projects. If this is your first project, you're going to hit Create New Xcode Project right here. And it's going to give you some options. So up here, notice you can develop for different platforms. I think when you install Xcode, it's going to ask you if you want to install things like for TV OS and Watch OS. If you're not developing for those platforms, you don't need to install those things. By default, you're going to have iOS and Mac OS. And here you can create a multi-platform app. That means an app that can run on, let's say, iPad, iPhone, different Apple platforms. What we're going to do here for the purpose of this tutorial is to take you through building an iOS, in other words, iPhone app. So we're going to go under the iOS tab here, and we're going to choose App right here. So click Next, and let me walk you through some of these project properties. So first of all, you're going to give your project a name. I'm going to give this, let's call this Xcode Tutorial Demo. And for the team, if you aren't part of the Apple developer program, then you probably don't have anything to put here. You might have a personal team if you have an Apple account, but you don't have to worry too much about that. Organization identifier combines with your product name to create a unique bundle identifier. Now, this is going to be unique for every single app that gets published in the App Store. So usually it goes like com dot, and then it might be your name or your company name or your website, whatever it may be, followed by dot, followed by your project name or product name. So right here, put com dot, your name or your website or your company. And then the interface is basically what sort of user interface technology do you want to use to build your app. By default, it should say SwiftUI. This is the direction that Apple is moving in. All of the latest things that get announced is regarding SwiftUI. Storyboard is sort of their older UI framework that's, as of this recording, still in use a lot out there. But SwiftUI is maybe about, as of this recording, maybe 3 years old, but it is the future as Apple sees. So I would recommend that you learn SwiftUI, especially as a beginner, because it's much easier to pick up. You can always go back and learn UIKit and storyboards. Language, definitely choose Swift. Oh, I don't even have the option. Okay, if you choose storyboard, you have the option to select Objective-C, which is I guess you could call the original programming language used. Since then, Apple has introduced the Swift programming language, which is the recommended option to learn these days. So I would definitely select Swift, whether you are using SwiftUI or storyboards. And then I would uncheck any of these options if you have any of these checked, because we don't need these things right now. It's just going to complicate things. And as you grow as an app developer, you'll learn more about these options. So let's go ahead and hit Next and create our brand new project. It's going to ask you where to save it. This you can leave unchecked as well, because again, it's not something that we're going to cover in this tutorial. If this is your first time creating an app, I would recommend that you create a dedicated place for all of your apps. For me, I'm just going to save this on my desktop. Hit create, and it's going to give it a whir, and Let me just expand this window, and then we're going to go through all of our new files because we're going to do this tutorial in the context of building an app. All right, after you give a few moments for your Xcode to load up the new project, you're going to see a giant iPhone on your screen here. Now, before we dive into this project and tell you what all of this means, it is a little overwhelming at first glance. We can split this interface up into 6 distinct parts. On your left hand side here, this is your Navigator. This is where you're going to look at the different files of your project. This part right here where you edit the code is called the editor, and it's where you're going to write your code. This is the canvas where you can preview what code you've written. Like, this is what is being generated from what you write in the editor. And then to the right of the canvas, we have the inspector area. Notice that there are a couple of tabs here in the inspector, and also notice that we have a couple of tabs up here for the navigators as well, because you can navigate between different things in your project. Now, the inspector area is for looking at details in your editor more closely. We'll dive deeper into each of these sections, but right now, let's give you an overview. Across the top, you have your toolbar, and this is where you can see the status of what is happening to your project, whether you are building it to run, where you are running it, because you can select to run it on different devices, and things like that. Down here, this is hidden, but you can bring this up to show the debug area. And this is where you're going to troubleshoot some of the errors or code that's happening with your project, but you can hide that for now. So there's a little button there for that. In order to create more space for yourself, you can hide these different panes as well. So for example, this button right here hides all of your inspectors. This button up here hides your navigators. So now you only have your editor and canvas where you'll be spending the majority of your time. And if you're used to just writing code and not really looking at your preview, you can even turn this off by tapping on this button and then saying show editor only, and you're going to get a screen full of code. So those are the 6 main areas you'll be spending your time in. This is the code editor. We can click this button and choose canvas to bring that back. And then we can tap on this button to bring the inspectors back, which allow us to dive into elements inside our editor. We can tap on this button to bring back our navigators, and this button down here to bring up our debug area. Now that you know the main areas of Xcode, let's dive into your project files so we can explain what an Xcode project is made up of. So first, let's ask the question, what is an Xcode project? We created a brand new project here, and we were asked where to save it. So let's pull up that location on disk and take a look at what files it created. So first of all, there's a folder with all of your project files inside. And notice how these map to what you see here in the file navigator. And then there's also this Xcode proj extension. This is your project file that links all of these files together into a single package. And so when you're sending someone an Xcode project, you don't just send this file, you also need all of the files in this folder together. So usually I'll just zip it up. But anyways, these are your files representing your new Xcode project. And then you can look at them through here, your file navigator. If you don't see these files, you might be on a different tab. So make sure you are on this first file navigator tab. Let's go through these files so you can understand what your project consists of. So if you click on this first root node up here, in fact, you can collapse it. You can see this encapsulates all of your files, which is representative of this right here. So if you click on that, the editor area is going to change, and these are all of the configuration details for your project. This is where you configure things like version numbers and orientations and things like that. There is a lot that you can do here, but we're not going to dive into that for now. You don't need to know any of that. Just know if you need to configure something with your project or enable a certain capability, let's say in-app purchase or something, this is where you would go. Next, we have that folder that houses all of our files, right? We saw that in the file system. If you expand that, we have this. This file is going to be your product name. And this is the entry point for your app. This is the code that gets executed first. So what I want you to notice in here is we're going to gloss over a lot of this code. If you want to dive deeper and understand what these things mean, I definitely urge you to check our App Beginner Challenge, where we have 10 lessons to spend together, and it's on YouTube. and I will explain in detail what all of these things are. For now, I want you to notice that this content view right here, what it's doing is it's creating a brand new content view. And if you look, we have a content view file up here. So let's click on that. And this is basically your content view. You can see a visual representation of it here. And right here, you'll see that it is declared as content view. And this is the code that generates all of this UI and all these elements that you see here. So if we go back to this entry point file, what is it doing? It's creating a new content view. So essentially it's creating a new screen, and that screen is content view. And that screen is dictated by this code right here. That's what the screen looks like. So hopefully you get a sense now of the flow of the app, right? You have the entry point, it's creating a brand new screen, and that screen's called content view, and that's what you have right here. And this code right here is what represents the content view UI. Now you're not limited to one screen, as you know, so you can always right click and choose new file, and you're going to be able to add a new view. And we're not going to touch into that today. Definitely check out the app beginner series, like I mentioned, in order to learn more about creating multiple screens and things like that and how to link them together and navigate between them. For now, let's move on to the other files in our project. We have this assets right here. Here, you're going to store the resources for your app. So what do I mean by resources? I mean things like your app icon, and you can simply drag and drop an image in here. Colors for your app. So here you have a default accent color for your app, but you can define your own colors. So maybe you have 3 or 4 colors that you reuse throughout your entire app. So this is where you would declare those colors. And then you could also, let's just click that. You could say this is, like button color or something like that. Maybe you are a little more descriptive than me, but you would basically define perhaps a color for all your buttons, and you would then choose a color for light mode or any mode, and you can define a color for dark mode. So if the user is using dark mode, it's automatically going to choose this color for your buttons. And when you're writing code in here, you can reference that color by this name right here. So we can also create images, like a new image set. So when we do that, let's say we have an image that we want to use in our app. So I'm going to name this image plant, like that. Notice that for plant, I have 1x, 2x, and 3x. Now these are different sizes for my image because there are different screen resolutions for iPhone. So essentially you're going to have the same image asset, but in 3 different sizes. One that's double the size and one that's triple the size. You're going to drag all 3 versions into here. And when the app runs, it's going to choose the appropriate image size to use based on the user's device resolution. All right, so let's try it out. I actually have an image that I prepared for us to take a look at, and that's just this plant right here. So I'm going to drag it into here. It's going to automatically create that asset name for me, and it's going to treat this as 1x. Now, if I had the 2x and 3x versions, I would drag it in here as well, and I would name it the same thing, but it would be named, it would essentially be like something like this. So let me just duplicate this file and show you how the file name would go. It'd be like the @2x, and then if I drag it in here, I could put it in the 2x. Now, obviously, I just duplicated it, so it's both actually the same size, but that's how you would name your 3 different sizes, and the other one would be @3x, and you drag it right there. So if I were to use this image inside my app, I would reference it by this. So we're going to try that in just a moment when we get to talking about the editor area. But for now, let's finish off talking about the rest of the files in our project. We have this last folder called preview content. And here we have another resource library. And this is where you can define your assets for previewing specifically. This is for when you're building your app and you are seeing these previews, perhaps you're not able to fully visualize what your UI will look like unless you have some sample images. So that is where you would put your test or sample or demo assets. That's where you put that there in preview assets. All right, now that you're familiar with all the files in your project and navigating through them using the file navigator, let's move on to the editor and canvas area. As you can probably guess by now, the editor area, including the canvas here, changes depending on what you select so that you can edit your selected file. If I select this project file, it's going to let me edit the project configuration details. If I select, let's say, the resource library, it's going to let me edit those things. And when I select this is a pure code file, it's only code, but when I have a view, it gives me a code plus canvas preview type of editor layout here. So there's actually a lot of cool productivity things with the editor here, such as being able to jump to different parts of the code. If you have a really long code file, you can adjust the sizing of this. And up here along this bar, you can see that we have multiple tabs. So you can switch files easily. You also have these arrows here, which are very easily missed, that allow you to jump backwards and forwards, kind of like a browser, like a Chrome or a Safari or something like that. You also have the ability to open up side-by-side files. So this window can be showing one code file while this one shows another. And because sometimes you want to compare or maybe look at two files at once, you can rearrange these windows. You can even have 4 depending on your screen real estate. But we can get deeper into those tips and tricks at the end of this tutorial. For now, I want to show you how you can write code in the code editor to build your user interface that you can preview here. So what I want to bring your attention to is this block of code right here. These few lines of code represent what you see here. So let's break it down a little bit. You see this V stack right here? That stands for vertical stack. And it basically allows you to put multiple things on top of each other. If you look at the vertical stack, let me just collapse this code a little bit so you can see. You write VStack, and then you have an opening bracket and a closing bracket. And whatever you put between those two brackets are the elements that you are stacking on top of each other. So if you take a look at the preview right here, you have a little image of a globe and you have this hello world label here. Those two things are on top of each other. So let me open up the contents of the VStack, and you'll see that we have an image element. That's this globe right here. And we have the text hello world. That's this label right here. And because both of those two things are inside the VStack, they're stacked on top of each other. And furthermore, the image is on top of the text. So you can see how writing this code is very intuitive to be able to imagine what this UI will look like. So now let's dive a little deeper into the image element. You have an image, and this part inside the brackets is specifying what image to show. Now, globe is an icon that comes pre-installed. In fact, we can change this globe to another pre-installed icon. These icons are called SF symbols, and they come with iOS. These are the standard symbols that iOS users are used to seeing on iPads and iPhones. And you can download this SF Symbols beta app. And I know in the beginning of this video, I told you not to download any betas, but there is no public release of this. It's still in beta. Let me launch it for you because I have it right here, and I'll show you what this looks like. So this is just an easy way to grab different icons to use in your app. So you don't have to download anything or add any images. So let's, for example, pick this one. The name of it is scribble.variable. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy the name. And then I'm going to replace that in here with globe. And it's doing something. And then you'll see it update here in the preview. And you see that is exactly the symbol that we have. Now, what are these? Let me just open this up a little bit so we see these in a line. Now, image scale large, it modifies the image element. So this is indicating what scale should we show the image. This is another modifier. It changes the color of the image element. So for example, I can change, instead of the accent color, I can change green. But before I do that, where have you heard accent color before? That's right, inside our resource library, accent color, right? Because I haven't specified any color there, it's using the default accent color, which is blue. So you can change the accent color, or you could just put green there, or perhaps red, and change it to red. Next, below that, we have a text element, which is essentially just a label. You can't really do anything with it, but it displays text. So we have hello world, or we can change that text. The quote inside here is the text that is displayed. So it's really as simple as that. Furthermore, if you want to modify this text element, maybe you want to make it bold. Let's add a bold modifier to the text, and now you can see that it's bold. So these two elements are contained within the VStack. I can collapse the VStack like that, and then you can see, what is this? This is a modifier for the VStack. This padding will add padding along all four sides of the VStack itself. If I remove this modifier, you can't visually see anything because the padding is sort of invisible here. But if we had a line of text that went all the way from the left to the right, if I didn't have the padding modifier, it would touch the two edges of the screen. If I added the padding modifier back, then we would get the left and the right margin. Now let's take a look at using the image that we had added to the asset catalog here, this asset Monstera deliciosa. I don't even know if I'm pronouncing that correctly, so I apologize if I mess that up. Deliciosa. And then for the image, we have system name, but that's not what we use for our own added image. That's what we use for the SF symbols that I just showed you. So we're going to get rid of all of that. And in between the two brackets here, we're just going to put two quotes, and then we're going to put the name of the asset that we added. So going back here, so just taking a look at that name, all lowercase with a dash in between, right? That's exactly how we have to spell it right here. All right, so that appears right there. And if we wanted to, let's say, give it rounded corners, we can use another modifier called corner radius. And it might be a little hard for you to remember all of these different modifiers, but over time, as you use them, you're going to get to know them and you're just going to remember. And I will show you coming up when we look at the inspector tab, how you can add these modifiers without actually remembering them. Okay, so what I do here, I added this modifier for the image element and I put 20. That's I guess the degree of rounding that I want. And then furthermore, I might say like, hey, this text is too close to the image. Perhaps I will add another modifier to this text, and I would add padding, and you can see that it's going to add padding on all four sides. So then if we move a little farther down in this code file, you'll see that it says content view previews, right? Previews right here. This is the little bit of code that is generating what you see in the preview, right? You can see here, it's creating a new content view, which is what this is, right? The cool thing about the preview is that we can actually put this in different states. We can see this UI that we've built in, let's say, a dark mode or an iPad or a smaller form factor or maybe landscape orientation. All those things you can do by adding modifiers on the preview here. But there's also an easier way to do that. We have buttons down here now where you can just click and do those things. So if you click on variants, for example, you can change the color scheme, or you can see the dark mode version and the light mode version. Perhaps you'd like to look at orientation differences and how your UI would be affected and how it would look in those orientations. You could do that. You can do type, like different size types, and there's a lot of different things that you can do here. Okay, so let's go back to our initial view here. So I hope that gives you an overview of the code editor and the preview and how editing the code in here affects what you see in the preview. Now there are, like I said, a lot more intricacies with the code editor to make writing code easier, as well as with the preview, but we'll save those for the tips and tricks section at the end of this video. For now, let's move on to explore the right side of the screen, the inspector panel. The inspector panel all the way on the right hand side has different tabs as well that give you various information and configuration for whatever you select either within the editor or files. So let me give you a demonstration. For example, we were talking about the VStack. If I put my cursor on the VStack, you'll see that the inspector panel changed, and I went into this panel right here for some quick help. This one gives me a summary about what the VStack does, and some sample code about how to use it. And furthermore, I can click on this link to open up the developer documentation, which gives me more information about the VStack and how to use it and all that sort of stuff. So that's very, very handy. If I select, let's say, the image, again, this changes to the image component and how to use it and all about it. Super helpful. If I select a file, for example, let's say I select the asset library and I select, let's say, accent color, and then I select this. If we switch over to a different tab, so this last tab here in the inspector panel is called the attributes inspector. I can configure different attributes about what I've selected in the editor here. So for this accent color, I could select what devices I want it to be available on. Does it appear on light, dark, or any? And then actually I can choose the actual color, for example. For images, for example, I can select an image and you can see there's all these different attributes that I can set in this attributes inspector. If I select a file, for example, I can go over to the identity and type inspector, which gives me information about the file itself, such as where it's located and is it part of this project, like right here. Now this is where it gets really interesting. If I go to the attributes inspector and I highlight a component here, you can see that I can configure different things for that image component. You know how we were writing code right here for corner radius? Well, I'm not limited to just writing code. I can actually modify things here. For example, you can see here that I have a corner radius. It's 20, and this is because it's reading the code that I've written, so I can see it here. If I wanted to change this to, let's say, 10, I can either modify the number here, or I can change the attribute to 10 right there, and you'll see it reflected in the preview and also the code. And if I'm not sure about what modifiers are available to me for the image component, I can come down here. Then I can take a look at the different available modifiers. I can type in one to filter. For example, if I want to make this image smaller, I might add a resizable modifier. Actually, I might not need to do that through here because I can just modify the size. So for example, if I, let's say, change the width to, let me just type this out, 200 and 300 or something like that, then I can change that right there. Now you'll notice that it just sort of cropped it. It didn't actually change the image size. If I wanted to actually change the size of the image, I would need to add a modifier here called resizable, like that. And then you'll see that now it actually changes the size of the image rather than just cropping it. Furthermore, do you know how in the text element here, we had added padding, right? So there's this padding modifier right here. If I got rid of this padding, you'll see that it goes back to being too close to the image. But what I can do is I can just add top padding. So I can select that top. And furthermore, I can either leave it to the default or I can change the amount of padding that I want. And then you can see it reflected here in the code. So using this inspector to add and edit modifiers for your element is also a very good way to learn what the code representation for that would be. And if you continue building apps and working inside Xcode, there'll come to be a point where it's faster for you to just type it out rather than going over here into the attributes inspector to configure things, because you'll notice that as I'm typing things, there's something called autocomplete, right? Typing that out, I just had to type .cor and then enter and then 10. And just typing that out it's way faster than clicking this and then coming here and selecting things. So there'll come a time, if you keep at it, where you just remember these modifiers and you can just type everything out in code. And I want to point out something else as well. With this text element, you can see different types of attributes that you can configure versus the image element. So for text, obviously you can configure the font, the weight, the alignment, and the line limits and things like that. With the image, you get different things. So that's the important thing to know about the inspector panel. Let's move on to this strip along the top called the toolbar. Now there are a few remarkable things about the toolbar. You know how I said if you highlight a component right here and you go over to the attributes inspector, you can configure different properties for it? Well, what if you don't know what components are available to you in SwiftUI to build your user interface with? Well, that's where the library comes in handy. If you click on this little plus icon in your Xcode toolbar, that brings up the library. And there are a few different tabs here, but we'll go through the first tab because that shows all of the different views and components that you can add to your user interface. And the best thing is that you can either double click this or you can drag and literally drop it into your code editor. And then you can see what the resulting code would be. So this is what a button looks like. You can see it here, it's green. And it's green because in our asset library, we changed the accent color to be a default of green. So actually, I don't really like that. So why don't we go ahead and just change that to the default blue, for example. If we go back to the content view, you'll see that the button is blue. Furthermore, this text inside the button here, you can change that to say, tap on me. And then inside here, action, you see this is an opening bracket, this is a closing bracket. In between these two brackets, you would put the code that you want to run when the user taps on the button. Let's open up the library again. For example, if you know what you're looking for, you can just filter, you can add a toggle. If you don't know what you're looking for, you don't know what this is, you can always look at this documentation on the right hand side. Again, you just drag it and drop it. And let's put that on a new line. And you can see there is your toggle switch. Now, the library doesn't only have views that you can add, it also has a collection of modifiers. See, that's what the second tab is. So that also answers the question, what if you don't know what modifications you can do to those elements? Again, you can try to drag and drop these different things. See, there are blur effects, accent colors, brightness, clip shapes, like all sorts of things you can explore. Here's one that we just used, corner radius. It gives you some documentation about that. You can have different code snippets. Like if you can't remember how to write something in the Swift programming language, you can look it up here. So let's say an if statement. This allows you to specify different branches of code. Like if this is true, then do this. If it's not true, like if it's false, then do that. That's what an if statement is. And then you can just drag this and drop it in here. And you can look at what that Swift code looks like. So this is a great way of actually learning as well, because you can see what the code representation of a button is. You can see what a code representation of a toggle is. And you can, don't forget, you can put your cursor on that and then you can configure that toggle or button over here in the attributes inspector. Now returning to the library for a second, we also have, let's get rid of this. You also have easy access to all of the images you've added to your resource libraries. You also have all of the custom colors that you have specified in your resource library. And this last one, surprise, are the symbols. So you don't even need that SF Symbols app, although that does give you an easier way to browse because all the icons are broken up into categories. But this is another way. Here's the one we use for Scribble variable. So the library is very, very useful. Also in the Xcode toolbar are the buttons here to hide and show the file navigator and the inspector panels respectively. Another thing I'll draw your attention to is this status right here. This tells you what Xcode is doing behind the scenes. Sometimes when you just launched Xcode and you're booting up your project or you're starting a new project, you'll see, you're going to be waiting. You're going to see a progress indicator and it's going to tell you what's happening behind the scenes. Also, you'll notice that there's your product name right here. And that might seem a little redundant because nothing happens. But it's because sometimes for larger projects, you have what's called an Xcode workspace. And you might have multiple Xcode projects inside a single workspace. But more importantly for you right now is probably this area right here. So this indicates what project you're looking at. And this indicates what simulator you want to use. Now, before we get into simulators, let me first mention about this preview right here. So this preview is a great way to take a look at what your code looks like visually. You can even interact with this. See, I can tap on this. I can toggle the switch, right? Like that. Now, a preview is great for seeing how this single view or screen looks like. However, if you want to go through the flow of your multi-screened app, you'd want to launch your app either on your phone, on your actual device, or on an iOS simulator, which is what you're selecting up here. So a simulator is just exactly what it sounds. It's going to be a representation of your app on a virtual device that appears on your screen. So let's show you an example of this. Now, just a note before we do this, after I show you the iOS simulator, I will show you how to run it on an actual device. Okay, so let's go ahead and select iPhone 14 Pro and look at this play button right here. Right? We are going to tap on this button, which will build the project, and it's going to, you can see the status part is doing stuff. Xcode's performing all of these operations behind the scenes, and it's getting ready to launch your app inside a virtual simulator, which it'll take some time. If this is the first time you're launching the iOS simulator, give it some time. It's going to bring it up on the screen. But you'll notice there's a stop button as well. So if you want to cancel the operation, just go ahead and hit stop. All right, so my iOS simulator has launched. Here it is. I can tap on this and drag it around. I can interact with it. If I had multiple screens, I could navigate and use my app. There are different things you can do here, such as rotate the orientation, or change the orientation, I mean. You can also take a screenshot. You can even take a video, actually, in one of these menu options up here. You can hit the home to go back to the home screen. And you know, this is really a simulator. You can have different contacts. You can have different apps in here. But this is primarily to test your app under different conditions. If you dive into the menu, you can simulate a lot of different scenarios that would happen with a real device. So you can check out all the menu options here, but what I want to, right here. So you can simulate a fall, you can play around with Face ID, you can, there's a lot of different things you can do in here. You can even put in a custom location. So you can simulate as if the user were at whatever location that you would want if you're building, let's say, a Maps app or something like that. Under the debug menu, you can simulate if the device is low on memory. You know, there's a lot you can do here, and that's why the simulator is so helpful. However, there is a limit with what you can do on the simulator. It is not perfect. The best thing would be to actually test it on a real device. But before we do that, one more thing I want to mention about the simulator is that you can have multiple simulators open at the same time. So you can hit stop, you can pick a different one, like let's say iPad or iPad Air, and you can launch that and you can have two simulators up and running at the same time. Another thing you can do with the simulator is you can reset it. So you can either restart the device or you can completely erase content and settings, which would be kind of simulate a brand new phone type of feeling. Okay, so if you want to run your app on an actual device, what would you do? Well, you would need an iPhone cable, and you would need to plug your device into your computer or your laptop. So I'm going to plug mine in. What you're going to see on your phone, if it recognizes your phone at all, is you're going to see a menu that says, do you trust this computer? If this is the first time you've plugged in your phone, it's going to say that, and you're going to say trust. You're going to enter in your passcode. And here you can see that it's preparing my phone for development. And then what you should see is your device here. Now for me, I haven't updated my iOS version on my phone yet. So it's telling me that I'm on 15.6.1. And because this is the new Xcode 14, it's running things on iOS 16, it can't put this app on my device until I update to iOS 16 on my device. However, if in theory we didn't have this problem, my phone would show up right here on the list and I'd be able to select it. like that, just like that. And I would be able to hit this button to run, and it would actually launch the phone just like you saw it launch in the simulator, except it would launch it on my phone and I would get to interact with it. So that's a really cool way to build something and very easily put it on your device and go around and show people. Now, the ability to do this, to put your app on your own device, is for testing only. So in about 14 days, I forget if it's 7 or 14 days, it will start to expire, and it's going to warn you about that. And at that point in time, you either plug it in again and reinstall the app on your device again to get another 14 days. Or if you want a more permanent solution, you need to sign up for the Apple Developer Program, which is a paid program. You can Google it, which would then give you the ability to install your app on your devices for the long term, as well as to publish it onto the App Store, as many apps that you want. All right, so now you have a real sense of building your app. You know how to preview your screen using previews. You know how to test your app on the iOS simulator. You know how to test your app on a real device. So how do you actually submit your app into the App Store and get it approved so that it can be used by millions of people? Let's talk a little bit more about that Apple Developer Program I just mentioned. So if we pull up the Apple page on the Apple Developer Program, it's about $100 USD to enroll per year. And that allows you to submit unlimited apps into the App Store. It allows you to invite beta testers to your app, and you can make it available for them to install. Here it says you can put it on the App Store and distribute your apps. You can get analytics about your sales, about like impressions on your App Store listing, conversions on the, clicking the download button and things like that. And you get a couple of credits to connect with Apple experts to troubleshoot your issue. So once you enroll in this Apple Developer Program, you have access to what's called the App Store Connect. And as it sounds, it's basically your dashboard for all things that have to do with the App Store. Now, these are some of the apps that they're not currently all on the App Store. However, I want to show you an example of how you would list your app and then how you would use Xcode to deploy your app into the App Store. And deploy is just a fancy word of saying sending or installing. So let's take this, for example. I'm going to click into this existing App Store listing. If you were to create a brand new app, you'd click this plus button to create a new App Store listing. And in here, you would configure all things about your app, such as the screenshots, app information, pricing, availability. You can manage ratings and reviews. You can configure in-app purchases and subscriptions and promotions and things like that. And this is where you'd also put your App Store description. Now, once you've configured all of this App Store listing information, what you'd want to do is, it depends what platforms you have, but for iOS, come into here and you would specify a new release. So we are at 1.0.3, and here you can talk about what's changed in this version. You can add screenshots for this specific version, write the description. All of this metadata is associated with that version. And then when it comes down to here, build, this is where you are going to specify your Xcode project. So how do you send your Xcode project from Xcode to App Store Connect, specifically linking it to this App Store listing? So you might think that, oh, I need to zip up all my files here, all these project files that I told you about, and then upload it here. But no, it's actually easier than that. So you go into Xcode, and what you want to do, once you've tested your project, it's ready to launch into the App Store, you go into Product right here, and you choose Archive. I'm not going to do it right now. Well, actually, okay, let's do it right now. So I'm going to hit Archive, and it's not ready. It's not ready for archiving right now, but you're basically preparing that package for distribution in the App Store. That's what archiving does. So if I were to successfully archive this project, then it would pop open this window, this organizer window, and I would see my app here. And if I don't even have it here because we didn't set this project up, and we didn't connect it to the team that is associated with this App Store Connect account. Otherwise, my app listing would automatically appear here. But anyhow, let's pretend that this is the app. Under archives right here, I would see the archive that I just made, right? And I would also give it a specific version number, right? So you can put it right here, version 2, version 1.0.5, or whatever it may be. And then you would go product archive. And then it would appear in this organizer window, and you'd be able to select it. And then you would be able to hit a button. It would run a couple of checks to make sure it's ready for the App Store. And then it would send that archive here, and it will know to send it to the app, to the specific version, and then it will show up here. And then once you have that build right here, put in any information that you would want the App Store reviewer to know as they review your app for App Store certification. And then you just hit the release button. You can also specify when to release it. You can manually release it after it gets approved, or you can automatically release the app after the reviewer approves it. And that's pretty much how you publish an app onto the App Store. Now, this is the end goal of all of us developers, right? But before you even get there, in the process of building your app, you're going to run into obstacles and roadblocks, and there's going to be code that doesn't work the way that you intended it to work. How do you troubleshoot these issues, and how do you resolve them? Let's take a quick look at debugging using the tools in Xcode, which is just a fancy way of saying fixing your bugs and resolving your issues. Okay, so we're back inside Xcode. You'll notice that when we launched this project in an iOS simulator, that this tray, this debug area popped up. Now, I mentioned you can tap on this button to open this area, but it popped open automatically because there was diagnostic information to display. Furthermore, there are 2 panels here, and that is controlled by these 2 buttons. So this one hides the right one, this one hides the left one or shows it, and this trash can icon clears this sort of log right here. So in order to debug your code, oftentimes it's just a process of trying to figure out where the problem is happening and then walking through step by step as the code is being executed and looking at if everything is as you expect. So once you can identify where things are going wrong, then you can see what the issue is and fix it. So here are some methods to display information and then also to walk through the code line by line. Let's start by removing this toggle element, and we'll use the button right now. So let's say when the button is tapped on, we are going to print something out into the console window here. So let's go ahead and launch the simulator again in on an iPhone 14. So this is a subsequent launch, so it should be a lot faster. All right, so when I tap on a button, you can see that each time I tap on it, it runs the code inside here and it prints it out. All right, furthermore, we can set what's called a breakpoint inside Xcode. So you see these line numbers. If I tap on line 14, I add this blue marker here. When the code is running, if it gets to that line where I have this blue marker, it's going to pause the execution. And then I can go peek at different things to see what's happening. So let's try that out. I've set a breakpoint on this. And if I tap on this now, it reaches here and it highlights this line in green because that's where the execution, it's about to execute that line of code. It hasn't yet. Because it sees I've set a breakpoint, it stops there. And then at this point, I can peek at different things. I can examine different variables or components or whatever the case may be. Furthermore, once the execution has paused on one of my breakpoints, I can start stepping through the code line by line, and that is controlled by these buttons here. So this button here is just continue the program execution, which is basically like continue executing from this breakpoint. So then it's going to run this line and keep going. Or this one right here, which is step over, which is then going to continue to the next line of code like that. You see what just happened? It executed this line and then it moved to the next line and it stopped again. So this way you can control the flow and you can slowly diagnose what is going on. Now, as a beginner, sometimes you're going to accidentally set a breakpoint and you're not going to know how to turn it off. So here's how you get a breakpoint away. You can either tap on it to disable it, or you can completely drag it off the line and get rid of it. You can tap it off, you tap it on, you drag it off. Furthermore, if you have multiple breakpoints, let's say here and here, you can go over to the Navigator. There's a breakpoint navigator, and it'll tell you exactly where you've set breakpoints in your project. It even shows you which ones are disabled. Okay, so I think that's a really good starter primer to debugging in Xcode. There's obviously a lot more that you can do once your code gets more complex, but it's a little hard to demonstrate those things with this simple project. Again, check out the beginner app series that we have here on the Code with Chris YouTube channel, and it will talk about all of those things. What I want to show you next are some cool tips and tricks to make using Xcode a lot more fun and efficient for you. Let's start off with the basic thing, which is comments. Now, comments are basically little notes that you can leave yourself without affecting the code. So it is just documentation or comments for yourself to understand what's going on. For example, up here on top of the file, you'll see these 2 forward slashes. That indicates the start of a comment, and anything after that for that entire line will not be treated as code. So this is just information, right? This is not code that actually gets run. So for example, as I'm writing this code and I want to remind myself what these things are, I can write 2 forward slashes and I can write vertical stack layout, and that is just treated as documentation. It's not code that will be run. I can write it here, image for the plant. I can write down here, label for whatever. Now, this is not the best use of a comment because this is just describing what this element is. Anyone who is fluent in reading Swift code can immediately see this, and that makes your comment irrelevant. Like, they're just going to understand what this is. Oh, I know that's an image. I know that's a label. I know that's a vertical stack. The best use of comments is actually to describe your logic in your head. So if you have multiple people working on the same project, or you're going to pass off this project to someone else, it's very helpful to describe why you're doing the things you are. So it's literally like, a note that says, I'm doing this because of this or whatever, and like, watch out for this. So when someone reads your code, they can read these comments and get the context for why you're doing what you're doing. The other cool thing you can do with comments is you can comment out lines of code. For example, you want to test something. You don't want to print hello, just put 2 forward slashes in front of it. And when you put 2 forward slashes like that, it's not going to execute that line of code, and you can very easily just uncomment it. If you want to comment out multiple lines of code, you can also use /* and */, and anything in between those 2 markers will be treated as a comment, as you can see here. And you can see here on the preview, it's going to disappear. Okay, so that's commenting and documentation. The other thing I want to show you is navigating around in the editor area, because that's where you're going to be spending a lot of time. So this breadcrumb area, at least that's what I call it. I don't know if that's the official name, but you can see it's sort of like a breadcrumb where there's your root node folder, there's your file, and this is within the current file. So if this file gets really long and there's a lot of code, you can tap on something to jump right to that section. Now that you know how to use comments, you can actually also put different sections yourself using comments. For example, this is the format you would use. You type mark, followed by colon and a line, and you can say this is for previews. And you can see this is bolded because this is special syntax right here. And you can also see a line going across, which gives you some visual separation. And when you tap on this now, you can see that that note is right there, and there's a line here. So that helps you sort of section your file and group your long code file into more legible chunks. Now, the other thing is that when you start adding views, you're going to have more files, and sometimes you'll be working in this area, then you're going to jump to another file and work in this area, and then you just want to go back. So instead of tapping on this file and going back here, you can very easily use the back and forward arrows. They work just like a web browser, back and forward. So this is very handy. There are even shortcut keys to do this as well. So you can find them in here and navigate, go forward and backward. This is your keys right here. Another thing is that sometimes, and you saw me use this earlier, sometimes when, let's say your code gets really long and you want to collapse this element, because all of this code right here is inside this VStack. So you can collapse it. There's also shortcut keys for this. This one I usually use right here, code folding, fold and unfold. This, I usually just use shortcut keys. So for me, it's Command, Option, and then left or right, and that will collapse it. So you can do that. Now I'm going to talk about searching through your project. First of all, if you press Command F, you're going to bring up this little search menu here, and you're going to be able to look for something inside this current file right there. But if you want to search throughout your entire project, you can also do that. Press Command, Shift, and F, and now you're going to be looking through your entire project. And it's going to tell you all the lines here, and this is useful in some cases as well. Tapping on any of these lines will bring you to exactly that file and that section. All right, now I want to talk about bringing up documentation, because that is oftentimes very helpful when you're starting to learn. So you can either place your cursor on the component, and then you can come here into the quick help right here, and you can look at the quick help documentation here. If that's not enough, you can also open developer documentation and open that up right here. However, there's an easier way. If you hold down Option, and you see that when I hover over image, my cursor turns into a question mark, and I tap on that, it's going to bring that up right there. So hold down Option or Alt, it may be on your keyboard, and it turns your cursor into a question mark. So that's really helpful. So I hope that was helpful. If you ever need a reminder, simply use the timestamps and chapters below the video. And if you want to keep growing your app development skills, I recommend that you try our beginner app challenge next. It's going to help grow your app skills and give you more practice inside Xcode. I'll see you there.